Okay, we are diving straight into this explainer today, because frankly, the sheer speed of this disaster demands our immediate attention. We're skipping the usual setup to look directly at the forces from below and the forces from above, the dual threats to Nepal. Right now, we're looking at a region that is literally being squeezed in a geologic vice from below and simultaneously melting from above. Today, we're breaking down these cascading catastrophes and exploring how tectonic volatility, combined with climate-driven glacial collapse, have created a truly unprecedented threat to the roof of the world.
So let's go back to the morning of August 26, 2026. Almost entirely without warning, a terrifying glacial flood roared down Nepal's Boat Koshi River Valley. Now, this wasn't just some heavy rain event. Experts on the ground described it as a tsunami of dirt. It was this absolutely massive wall of water, ice, mud, and rock that just cascaded more than 170 kilometers down a really critical valley that links Kathmandu in Nepal to Lhasa in Tibet. And the scariest part? It left almost zero time for any kind of warning or evacuation.
To help you picture this incredible scale, just look at this staggering statistic. 40 kilometers downstream, the river rose 9 meters in roughly 30 minutes. I mean, think about that. Imagine dropping a boulder the size of a mountain into an already completely full bathtub. That is essentially what happened here. It sent a wave, we're talking as high as a 3-story building, crashing through towns, over critical roads, and into river valleys that were perfectly calm just moments before.
And this really illustrates why the human toll here is so severe. You see, this wasn't some empty, untouched wilderness. It was peak tourist and pilgrimage season. The valley was absolutely packed with local residents, hydropower workers, and hundreds of foreign nationals. We're talking about trekkers celebrating the Jane Purnima festival and pilgrims making their way to the sacred Mount Kailash in Tibet. So in an instant, this localized geographic event turned into a massive international tragedy. Over 100 Indian nationals are among the missing, right alongside citizens from the US, Australia, Malaysia, and beyond.
Now, what's really interesting here, and honestly pretty chilling, is this bizarre data gap on the Chinese side of the border. Usually, in disaster reporting, the numbers of confirmed dead and missing moves somewhat in tandem, right? But looking at the Tibet Autonomous Region data, state media reported only 3 confirmed deaths against a staggering 265 missing. This massive gap tells us that the terrain is so unbelievably unstable that recovery is heavily delayed. So whatever numbers we're looking at right now, they are far, far from the final reality.
Grounding this in the harsh human reality of the rescue effort, responders arriving at the scene were faced with a totally apocalyptic landscape. When they reached the main bridge connecting Nepal and China, which is this absolutely critical artery for trade and travel, they didn't just find a damaged structure. As this quote points out, the bridge itself was gone. Not damaged, completely vanished. It wiped out the fastest route in or out of the valley at the exact moment rescue crews desperately needed to move heavy equipment in and survivors out.
Section 1. The forces from below, tectonic volatility. So, why did this happen on a perfectly clear morning without a drop of rain? Well, exactly 3 minutes before the flood, a 4.4 magnitude earthquake struck nearby. And while scientists are still trying to pin down the exact link, this points us directly to the deep, unseen forces shifting right beneath Nepal.
The crucial thing to understand here is that this entire region sits directly on the main frontal thrust. This is where the Indian tectonic plate is just relentlessly driving underneath the Eurasian plate at a rate of about 45 millimeters a year. It's not just a line drawn on a geological map. It is an active, living vice that builds immense, almost unimaginable pressure over decades and centuries until, eventually, the Earth simply snaps.
To grasp the raw, terrifying power of this fault line, we just have to look back a few years to April 2015. A horrific 7.8 magnitude earthquake struck Nepal, and the force was so immense that a massive block of the Earth's crust, a block carrying the entire capital city of Kathmandu, rapidly shifted 3 meters south in just 30 seconds. 3 meters in half a minute.
And that brilliantly illustrates why the 2015 damage was so apocalyptic. Kathmandu doesn't actually sit on solid bedrock. It sits on the Kathmandu Basin, which is this geologic depression filled with up to 600 meters of sedimentary rock from an ancient lake. So, when the quake hit, this sediment acted exactly like a giant bowl of jelly. It trapped and magnified those low-frequency seismic waves, violently shaking the city and flattening centuries-old UNESCO World Heritage Sites into absolute dust.
Survivors of that 2015 quake described the visceral horror of the Earth literally tearing itself apart. Journalist Dylan Roberts, who was up near the Tibet border when the quake struck, recalled the sound being less like a vibration and more like deafening thunder. He said it sounded as if the mountains themselves were raining boulders.
Amidst all that overwhelming chaos, it's the human stories that truly anchor our understanding of these massive disasters. Take Bishwa, for example. He's a local pastor whose home village was located right near the Tibet border in one of the hardest-hit areas, an area where over 2,500 people lost their lives. For 8 agonizing days, he had zero communication, nothing. He traveled on foot through this devastated landscape, past unimaginable destruction, and miraculously, he actually found his mother and sister alive.
But looking at the macro statistics of that 2015 quake, they are still staggering today. Nearly 9,000 dead, almost 22,000 injured, and 3.5 million people left completely homeless. This historical context proves without a doubt that Nepal is fundamentally built on a foundation of extreme tectonic risk. But here's the thing, that is only half the story.
Section 2. The forces from above, climate, and crumbling mountains. Because now Nepal is facing a secondary, deeply terrifying threat, and this one is falling from the sky. The mountains themselves are crumbling.
To understand this part of the puzzle, we have to talk about permafrost. The Himalayas are often called the world's third pole because of their massive stores of ice. For centuries, permafrost, which is permanently frozen rock and soil, has acted like a giant glue, binding these incredibly steep mountain slopes together. But as global temperatures rapidly rise, this permafrost is degrading. It's thawing out, which is completely destabilizing these massive mountainsides that hold back millions of tons of ice and rock. When we compare these two generation-defining disasters side by side, we see a really crucial difference. Tectonic earthquakes, like the one in 2015, are currently completely impossible to predict. They hit suddenly, and the damage is widespread. But the 2026 glacial flood, that is climate-driven. It's localized to very specific valleys, and most importantly, failing glaciers often show physical warning signs before they collapse, meaning they are potentially monitorable, if we know where to look.
And if we look closely at the data, there were definitely warnings. This timeline proves the August 2026 flood was not just some isolated freak event. Unbelievably, it was the third catastrophic water disaster to strike this exact same Boti-Koshi river system in just 13 months. It's a valley under relentless siege from a changing climate above.
The first of those recent events, back in July 2025, was what scientists call a GLOF, a glacial lake outburst flood. This happens when meltwater pools into a massive lake that's only held back by a fragile wall of loose rock and ice. If a landslide hits it, or the ice wall melts just a tiny bit too much, that natural dam bursts, sending the entire lake rushing downstream. It is a specific climate phenomenon that is becoming dangerously common as the Hindu Kush Himalaya region warms at this accelerating rate. Section 3. A three-country emergency, the downstream domino effect. Now, because water respects absolutely no borders, a localized glacier collapse at the top of the world instantly transforms into a major international crisis. This disaster triggered a massive downstream domino effect involving Nepal, China, and India.
Downstream in India, the situation escalated incredibly fast. The floodwaters tore through Nepal and moved directly south into the Gandak River system, putting the heavily populated states of Bihar and Uttar Pradesh on high alert. Indian authorities had to immediately open all 36 gates of the Gandak barrage just as a precaution, while simultaneously mobilizing Indian Air Force C-17 and C-130 transport planes to send heavy relief materials straight back up into Nepal.
Section 4. Preparing for the next one, racing against the clock. So with these dual threats, unpredictable earthquakes below and melting, unstable glaciers above, the ultimate question is, how does this fragile region prepare for the inevitable next disaster? Because the science tells us without a doubt another one is coming.
The most terrifying ticking clock in all of this is actually a lack of data. Currently, neither Nepal nor China has published a comprehensive, complete map of which glaciers along this high-altitude border are actually unstable right now. Disaster authorities are largely relying on reactive satellite imagery, meaning they're looking at the destruction after it already happens, rather than proactively mapping out which mountainside is slumping, cracking, and getting ready to collapse next.
But listen, there is a path forward, and we know early warning systems actually work. Just recently, during a similar glacier collapse in Switzerland, authorities were able to evacuate a town beforehand and not a single person died.
To replicate that kind of success in the Himalayas, it requires real-time river sensors, highly predictive satellite monitoring, and rapid, transparent cross-border data sharing. Fortunately, funds like the Green Climate Fund are beginning to invest millions into these exact systems for Nepal. As we watch the recovery efforts unfold, I want to leave you with this final thought. The tectonic shifts below the Himalayas are ancient and they are unstoppable. But the climate shifts above are accelerating right before our eyes. So, are we going to treat this latest flood as just another tragic one-off, or will we finally recognize it as the ultimate warning? Because until we deeply respect and monitor the dual forces squeezing Nepal from both sides, the roof of the world will remain a dangerously fragile place. Thanks for joining me on this explainer today. I really hope this helps you grasp the true scale of what's happening out there. I'll see you next time.